also, I think the difference with inquiry-based teaching as opposed to just having it all figured out ahead of time is that you respond to what the children do each day, so you don't often know what you're doing the next day until today has happened. And you might have several ideas about where it might go, but then when you find out what happened today, then you can plan tomorrow. So sometimes you end up places you didn't think you were going to go, or you take a different path than you thought.
But I think a lot of people think that inquiry is about just starting from kids' questions and not having any say about what the big idea is going to be in the class. And I think for all of us, we would have a really clear idea of what our starting point was going to be. But it's being held by a big idea. And although there's a framework there, the framework is very loose, as opposed to be very tight and set to a schedule. And our framework would also be made up of big ideas, not of, I have this worksheet I want to get to by Monday, and I have this test that I want to get to by the following Thursday. But I want to do some kind of assessment to see what they know at this point. Now I need to follow this up by some experimentation. Now we need to get some resources out where the kids are looking at books and drawing information from there. Now we need to go back to some kind of big discussion because this question has come up. So the framework is about how we engage the children's understanding and how we move them forward, as opposed to this worksheet, this worksheet, this worksheet, this test, this worksheet, now we're done. But the framework is there, but it is very loose, and it changes where we want to bring it in, because if we feel like the kids really aren't understanding something, then we know our job is really to come in with that experiment or that excerpt from a book to help their understanding more fully before we go back to what's the next thing that we want to find out or what questions have arisen from that. So there are absolutely big ideas holding it together that we have brought to the children, but then we release the path to them based on questions and the comments that they have.
Yeah, there's definitely a map of places where you'd like to go, and some of them are curriculum related and some of them are kind of process related, right? The things that you want the children to do, like I want them to design an experiment somewhere in this, in this science unit or something like that. But then, I think it's, what the loose or the open part is exactly how you're going to get to each of those things, right? Then that will be very much dependent on what the children are saying and what they're doing, where their interest lies. But I think it's, it's kind of, I think people, ask the kids what they think a lot, right? Anywhere, right? And that isn't necessarily just inquiry teaching, just asking the kids what they think, but it's kind of actually really caring about what they think, right? And using it outside of, not just plowing on with whatever you were going to do, regardless of what the students say, right? What the students think, but instead, really using what they think to get you to some of those places where you're hoping to go.
One makes assumptions grounded in experience and grounded in thoughtfulness about where you might go. So she's talking about the colors of leaves. It's something that comes up again and again at this time of year. So we kind of prepare for that. But if the kids aren't interested in the colors of leaves, we're not going to suddenly say, stop everything you're thinking about and all the things that you're looking at. Now we're going to talk about the colors of leaves because I've got the handout. You let that go, because you know that the kind of information that's going to be gleaned from this path that they've gone down about seeds is going to hit all those points on the map of deep questioning, following up on research, following up with experiments, hands-on stuff. It's going to get to all of those things that inform learning and deep understanding, but simply a slightly different top of our knowledge base that's going to be touched on.
At the same time, it is a delicate balance, and because children, and partly because I work with very young children, but even older kids, they don't necessarily know what questions are there to be asked. And I do feel, especially with the little ones, is they have to start with some common experiences that then they start spontaneously wondering about, and then you're off and away. But one really and the common experiences can be something extremely hands-on and observational. it could be a text
Yeah.
that one starts with. And I feel in classrooms where, you know, in our classrooms, the children have grown up together.
Mm-hmm.
So the culture, there is a common culture in the classrooms
Mm-hmm.
beyond the very early years, you know, the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in a public school where there's a lot more coming and going, where kids are coming from many different kinds of experiences, different ways of being in school, different expectations of the kinds of language they're going to use, I think there is an onus on teachers to somehow provide a common focus and then listen to the children too. But not just to think that if you just open up a topic
to questions,
to questions
Yeah.
that you're necessarily going to get very far.
I think that applies to the oldest ones too. You know, like they're, you know, I think they begin to lose comfort with just kind of open-ended question asking or theorizing because they know that it's not rooted in anything, right? You know,
Exactly.
it's, you know, and so they don't tend to enjoy that either. You know, so it really does work best, I think, for them to have it, you know, to have common experiences, you know, a common experiment, a common text that we've all read, a common video we've all watched, like something like that, and then to build, you know, to really ask them, okay, well, you know, what's going on? What do you think about this?
And I think, again, often people think about inquiry is that the teacher is removing themselves from so much of this, letting the kids take the reins and just kind of run with it. And that's not it at all, because we have to be there to say, this question is really valuable. Let's pull that out of what this discussion might be. Or now we need to do this experiment, and they haven't thought about it, but this is going to inform them, or this is going to create that common experience. So we're never away from kind of manipulating and pushing and pulling and getting them to where we think the deeper understanding is going to come from. We constantly have a job and a role in that. And I think that can be so easily misunderstood by this idea of just letting the kids direct it. We're letting their thinking help inform us what comes next, but we're still the ones kind of plotting it out. We just might be plotting it out in a very responsive way, that it has a very quick turnaround, so we can't plan too far ahead, but we're still plotting it out as we go.
And it is taught when we're teaching this way, is that the children become so deeply engaged in what they're doing that it's not just something they do at school on Mondays from 1 till 2 o'clock, but it really becomes a part of them, and parents will come and say, my child can't stop talking about what they're learning, they were asking me questions, they want to go and find out more. And I even notice year to year that children will talk to me about what they learned in other years. So it's not that the unit's over, we're going to test it, and now forget about it and on to the next. But they really do become lifelong learners in the different topics that they learn about in their classes. And I think that's really neat. And it is about that learning. It doesn't matter really if we do seeds or why leaves change color. It's about that learning how to learn, how to find things out, and becoming a lifelong learner that really sticks.
And the plus side to them sort of not knowing what questions to ask, in the sense, is that they don't know which questions not to ask. You know what I mean? Like they don't know that there are you know, limits to what, you know, a 10-year-old is supposed to learn about physics or something like that. You know, they just keep asking. You know, they just, you know, so like right now during this electricity unit, the curriculum would say that we should really sort of stop at the idea of series and parallel circuits, you know, like just make the light bulbs turn on, and then everybody's happy, right? You know, and you know, the kids right now are just going down this rabbit hole of particle physics, right? You know, they just really want to know what. Well, okay, if there are atoms and there are protons and there are neutrons and then there are electrons, well, you know, what if you take one of the electrons away? Does it still work? Like, you know, what's happening? What if you pull one of the protons off? What happens? You know, like. So, like, they don't know that, you know, you're not supposed to know that till grade 11. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know, so.
But this expectation that we build, that they deserve to be engaged, like they demand that of all of their learning, which is amazing. And it means that we have to be so responsive to whatever we're teaching. And, you know, not everything is taught through an inquiry lens. Lots of math is, and some math isn't. And maybe some spelling is, although maybe lots of it isn't. And we have to keep that in mind. Like, not everything can be taught in that open-ended way. Some things have to be really prescribed and careful and follow, a very careful developmental approach. But what we build into the kids, I think, through teaching this way, is this expectation that they deserve to be engaged in what they're learning about, that they're not doing it for us, that they're doing it for them. Mm-hmm. And although, lots of kids want to please the teacher, really what you just see is the bulk of the kids, not every single one with every single topic that you end up on, but most of the kids they want to go down that rabbit hole because they just get excited about what they can be learning and what they can be doing and how far it can take them. And it translates right across the whole day. Everything that they end up doing, they bring this expectation of engagement. And just because they expect that, they're so much more open to it. It's so much more easy to engage them because you've built that relationship where that's part of what teaching and learning is about.
It totally changes our job.
Which is interesting, because actually it's what you see kids everywhere doing when they're not in school.
In life.
So in fact, we're giving them a chance to carry on in school the way, seriously, I mean, you see kids out in the park with their parents or with their nannies, and they're doing that constantly. So it's not something that we've trained our children.
No, we train them out of that way. We can't train
But
them
schools can really train them out of it.
That notion that you can cover a lot with one wonderful topic is really a great way to go. If I feel comfortable in that, I think it's a little bit of a leap of faith when you first do it, but once you do it and you go down the rabbit hole, it's unlimited. It's deeper than you ever thought. It's wider than you ever thought. It's way more interesting as a teacher. It feels like creative teaching. Yeah. So I think that expectation that there should be a certain amount of limited time, that isn't natural. Naturally, they spend a lot of time, and naturally we should be supporting that.
But I think this sense of being comfortable with not knowing is at the base of the kind of curiosity that feels completely comfortable taking a magnifying glass, tracing the map, asking a question, or all the other ways we show curiosity. So remember that Paul Harris book, and Paul was here last year from Harvard talking about trusting what you know, how we learn from others. That sense of children's questions being really very important if we take the time to answer them. And he may have meant, giving a direct answer or take the time to honor them in some other way. But the sense that a child between 2 and 5 will ask 40,000 questions of a nature of looking for information is a pretty interesting thing to do if we set up classrooms that wouldn't have space in a year for 40,000 questions. So it's kind of a different point of view for me to think about not knowing being extremely valuable currency.
I really feel I do learn along with the students because they do ask questions that I don't expect, and we go so deeply. But even in grade 1, we go so deeply into topics.
What are we going to learn about this year? They're very excited about this. They are eager out of the gate to get going on something right away.
I had one of your children come to me today who was in my class last year, and she said to me, "What are you studying right now?" And I said to her, "We're learning about trees and seeds." And she said, "Oh, we learned about that in SK." And I said, "Well, that's why we didn't do that together last year, because we always talk. And so Carol told me that you had, so that's why we didn't do that last year. But this year's class hadn't learned about that." But I just loved it. And I said, "What are you studying?" And she said, "Birds." And I said, I know Cindy loves birds, and she loves to share that with you." And she just nodded her head. So a great example of how she was interested in what we were doing. And
I think can be so valuable about inquiry is that, I think it's kind of something that people who don't do it a lot don't see on the surface, is that I think it lends itself to differentiation and different learners so well, actually, right? More than a different approach, right? In that, if the children are having the opportunity to pursue their questions, right? If they're having the opportunity to really look at their ideas and try to improve their ideas, then it's a natural fit with a child who needs to work on one level versus a child who needs to work on another, right? And so long as they all have the opportunity somehow, and this is, the tricky part, but they all have the opportunity to contribute what they have learned back to a group, then, in reality, they're all working together, right? They're equals in that moment, right? They've asked their question, child A has, asked his questions or her questions and pursued them in her way, done reading that's appropriate for her or him or whatever, and, child B has done the same thing. But so long as they have that opportunity, they can both contribute to each other. It just, rather than, us as the teacher trying to find some middle point and aiming something right there. You know what I mean? Which hits no one, right?
And the other thing about inquiry, how much it lends itself to integration. So art becomes a huge method of getting at what children know or expressing what they're thinking about something at a given moment. Or maybe somebody's building something or somebody's writing about a piece. But all these different ways that they can show you what they know at that moment or what their interests are at that moment. It really lends itself to kids being able to go into their comfort areas where they're best, most communicative.
Two things come to mind when you ask that. I think, one is developing that sense of trust that if a child goes off and pursues the thing that they're interested in, right, or has a little bit of time or a little bit of space to do that they will come back with something meaningful to other people, right? And so that you don't have this need then for everyone to be doing the same thing, because one way of making sure that everyone has something to contribute is if everyone has kind of actually researched something different, right? Then they don't know what the other people have done, right? And but I think it's a bit of a putting trust in a student that, okay, if you are really interested in this, but then your job is to figure that out and have a way of explaining that to the rest of us, right? But I think I see it though as it's a big part of the role of the teacher in the inquiry classroom to make other students thinking explicit to other students, right? To make a student's thinking explicit and available to everyone, so that even if they're writing or they're doing a presentation or they're speaking, I think there's so much rephrasing, reinterpreting, putting it back out, because children will express things in all kinds of ways, but that step of making one child's thinking available to everyone, I think is a huge part of what the teacher has to do.
And even making their thinking available in a new way to them. That's always a bit dangerous because you don't want to be putting words in someone's mouth. But I find one does a lot of, you hear a child groping for something and you say, do you mean, and the kids, hopefully, and the kids get pretty good at saying no. But sometimes it's just helpful to hear your words reflected back in a slightly different way, and it lets you sort of see, as if from the outside, what has been very internal, and I think it does bring you to a new kind of understanding.
But also that they see that you're taking the time to really understand what they're saying and to really listen to them.
And to be interested in what they're learning, which is so different than the kind of checklist. If we think about assessment in a different way, where instead to think about really listening to what the child has learned, that's a huge part of being in an inquiry classroom, because we can't say in advance what they're going to.
Don't worry about very basic questions, because the simplest questions often, I find, draw the richest responses, So it's okay to ask them to really think about things on a very simple level, and it's amazing how much thinking that will generate.
Also, just to keep in mind that the kids in your class may have never learned this way before, so you need to start where the children are, and if they can't just jump in the way you want them to, just be patient and don't think you need to revert back to the way they learned before because they can't do this. It just may take some time for them to understand that you really do want to know what they think and you really are interested in their questions. So don't throw in the towel, stay the course, but it's not going to happen overnight if children have come out of places where their learning in social studies and science or math has been a lot of filling in worksheets.
Don't think you have to have all the answers to start with. You can't, it's impossible. So let yourself go, share that journey with the kids, admit to them that you don't know the answer, and share that, how are we going to find out?
Don't worry if you're doing inquiry or not.
Well,
Right? You know, don't
that's
worry what
that's a
label you
really
put on
good
it.
point.
Just you know, ask the children what they think and do something with that. You know, just
Yeah, trust.
Yeah.
Trust.